Hello, and welcome to week one of our global book study of Godly Play, A Way of Religious Education by Dr. Jerome Berryman. I am Heather Ingersoll, the Executive Director for the Godly Play Foundation, and I am just thrilled that you have decided to join us on this journey of deepening our understanding of godly play and children's spirituality by reading this work together. I am thrilled and honored to introduce you to our first guest for this series. Our guest is Dr. Holly Catterton Allen. She is a professor of family studies and Christian ministries at Lipscomb University in Nashville, Tennessee. She previously taught at John Brown University, Biola University, and Abilene Christian University. Dr. Allen's areas of scholarly interest are children's spirituality and intergenerational issues, and she leads two national ecumenical conferences, both that I attended. They joined together this year, and I had the privilege of attending both those, Intergenerate and the Children's Spirituality Summit. She is the editor of Nurturing Children's Spirituality and Intergenerate, and the co-author of Intergenerational Christian Formation, and her newest book, Forming Resilient Children, The Role of Spiritual Formation for Healthy Development, is available for pre-order now. We spend some time talking about this book and how her research in existential questions, meaning-making, and resilience with children connects to our work in godly play and children's spiritual formation.
In general, all of Jerome's work has informed my professional life since 1998 when I read Catherine Stonehouse's Joining Children on the Spiritual Journey. It was through her work that I was introduced to Jerome's work. And in 1999, then, I began my doctoral work attempting to answer my research question was, what is it about intergenerational Christian experiences that have some profound effect on children and adults? But before I could answer that research question, I had to figure out what kind of change I was seeing in the children in these intergenerational groups that I was working with. And reading Catherine Stonehouse's book helped me understand that I was looking for spirituality. And then that led me to do about a third of my lit review on children's spirituality, which led me to Jerome's work. So I began reading more of his work. I saw my first godly play story at the first International Children's Spirituality Conference in Chichester, England in 2000. But there were no children there. So I thought it was interesting and it looked intriguing, but I just I wasn't able to put it together yet. So I went back and read some more of Jerome's work and it began to make more sense. I saw my second godly play story at the first United States Children's Spirituality Conference in 2003 at Concordia. And again, there were no children. So I still didn't quite fully grasp what he was saying. So when I began teaching children's ministry courses in 2003, I knew this was the piece that was missing. I wanted to include it, but I had never actually seen one with children, so I wasn't really sure what I was doing. So I knew we needed that place of openness, that wondering place, that ability to allow children to enter the story. So I trained my students. We practiced on the Good Shepherd, and we presented for the first time with children at the church where I was attending at the time. There were 10 children. Ages about 4 or 5 up to about 10 or 11, 10 kids. And they were sitting around the godly play area, and we rolled out the grass, and they just were very close. And just before we started, Joel Fredlund, who was a student, a soccer player who was self-described hyper kid, he said, one of my college students, he said, when I was a kid, if I'd ever tried to listen to one of these godly play stories, I wouldn't have made it. I'd have been out of there in 2 minutes. And I said, Joel, I've never seen it with children. You may be right. So he was among those students who presented that first one. And by the end of the story, the children had gotten down on all fours. They had their hands like this and their nose right up to the grass. And they were just fully engaged, totally intrigued. They were transfixed. They hung on every word. They were full of wonder. Some of the other college students took the children out and they did some follow-up activities with them. And Joel and I were cleaning up this room, and he said, "I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't been here." And I said, "Me either." But from then on, I was a believer, and I read Jerome's works with new understanding. It all began to open for me. It made sense. Well, again, when I first read that in Jerome's work, I thought, I don't know. I remember his story. It really stayed with me. When he was 4 or 5 years old and he was at his grandmother's house, and he sits up and he says, "Grandmother, why do I have to die?" And then he draws from that as he says, other children ask these questions. And then after his work with the children in the pediatric hospital in Houston, he says, children have these concerns, these existential concerns, this awareness of death, a need for meaning, a threat to freedom, being alone. And I read those and I thought, do children really have those concerns? I mean, I read that about 20 years ago, thinking, I'm not sure that all children do. I mean, maybe those children did in the children's hospital. So I began thinking about my own childhood, and I thought, well, I don't think I really grappled with those. But interestingly, over these last 20 years, as I've come to know God better, as I've remembered, I've seen things differently, I listen to him better, I'm learning how to rest in his long, steady, loving gaze. He has opened my eyes and my heart to who I was as a child. I've remembered moments and events, and I now see how God was present with me. I did not have language to articulate what I was dealing with as a child, the thoughts that I had, the struggles that I had. And so as I began to put all this together, I remembered one of the things that Jerome says is that godly play gives children language, And I was exhibit A. I realized I didn't have language. I had lived in a really tidy little world of strong Christian family, but there were answers to everything, always. I mean, I just had to ask somebody and they would tell me. And I was a good little girl. I wanted to do what was right. I wanted to know what was right. I wanted to do what was right. And as far as I knew, there was just one answer for every question, and you would learn it and then you would do it. But it was a pretty small world, and it was a pretty strict world. I didn't know anything about knowing God. I remember I had some Baptist friends who would talk about the relationship with God, and I thought, what's that? I didn't have what I needed. I didn't know you could actually know God or enter his story or even listen to him. And I was a really solitary child. There was a creek that ran behind my house. It was tree lined, and I spent a lot of my summer out there. There was a place where the creek made a bend, and it had pooled up into a small little pond, maybe 6 or 8 feet across, not very big and pretty shallow. A tree had fallen over it, and I would go out there and lie on that tree. There was a limb that came up this way, and I would lie on that tree, lean up against that branch, and just be. And I was alone, but I was content. I would read back there, but I didn't know that God was with me. And as an adult, I've been able to look back and see myself sitting on that tree and realize God was with me. I was not alone. He met me there. I didn't have language for the feelings I had. Godly play would have helped me with that had I known. I didn't know. In the past few years, I've had a course on children's spiritual development that I've been teaching to my college students. And we work with children. The first year we worked with children whose parents are incarcerated. Next year we worked with refugee kids. Another year we worked with children who are in after-school program in a very low socioeconomic level. We've also worked in lots of other settings, but along the way, we've, of course, worked with children who are adopted, children who have a parent who's terminally ill, children who are dealing with racial epithets, children who live in chronic poverty. I mean, just all kinds of kiddos. And I have come to see that almost all children at some point or another are dealing with some of these existential concerns. And we do 2 godly play lessons during the semester. And usually about halfway through the semester, the children begin to feel safe enough to share. And it's really pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. Two stories that really connect well with this, and both happened in this setting that I was talking about. One is about Lucy. Lucy was 7 when she first came to us, and her mentor was Autumn. And Lucy was one of those children who didn't generally follow the rules. Whatever was kind of selected for the day, she wanted to pick something else. And Autumn figured that out pretty early. Lucy tended to respond to anything with very churchy answers. What I knew that wasn't general knowledge was that her mom had been diagnosed with terminal cancer the year before. Lucy lives on my block. And so I knew her and her family well. And so I knew what she was struggling with, but Lucy never talked about it to her mentor. So about the 6th or 7th week, we'd had 2 godly play stories by then. We were walking a labyrinth that day, and as we suspected, Lucy did not follow the rules. She went jump, 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 jump. She jumped over all the lines, stomped on them, ran, got to the center, and plopped down. She was supposed to follow her mentor in slowly, not stepping on the lines, but we knew Lucy. She got to the middle, and I thought, okay, now what's she going to do? But I was kind of watching from a distance. This was just Autumn and Lucy. And when they got to the middle, Autumn said, well, we're going to bow our heads now. We're going to talk to God, and then we'll listen to God. I don't know what I thought Lucy would do, but what she did was she bowed her head. They were on their knees in the middle. And as the minutes went by, Lucy's head just went lower and lower and lower. And eventually she was just kind of curled up in a ball with her head on her knees. And there was by then another child waiting to walk the labyrinth. And Autumn said, she just touched Lucy and said, are you listening to God? And Lucy looked up and said, what am I going to do without my mama? So a lot of things had been happening in her as she became safer and safer to talk about the things that were happening in her life, the hard things she was facing. She was indeed dealing with awareness of death, aloneness, all those existential, making meaning. How do you make meaning of your life when your mother's not going to be there? This gave her a safe place. The whole semester, having those hours with a mentor, talking about spiritual things, and she finally became safe enough to begin to grapple with those meaning-making ideas with her mentor. It was pretty amazing for a 7-year-old. To address that, I'll need to define children's spirituality and resilience. In my book, I talk about children's spirituality as their capacity to have relationships with themselves, with others, and with God. And I base that on the first and greatest commandment and the second one: love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. I think children, all of us, are born as spiritual beings, and we as adults can encourage and nurture that, or we can hinder and discourage that. Resilience is defined by those who study that construct as adapting well in the face of trauma, adversity, or significant stress. Children who are resilient exhibit positive outcomes, such as, after surviving adverse circumstances, such as they do well in school, well enough in school, they're socially competent, they are law-abiding, they're engaged in community, they're mentally healthy. And they're not exhibiting maladaptive outcomes like poor school performance, depression, or anxiety, or substance abuse. So this is what resilience looks like: positive outcomes and avoidance of maladaptive outcomes. And most importantly, those who study resilience say there are several factors that can contribute to resilience after a child has faced some trauma or adversity or periods of stress. These are protective factors. They buffer or moderate the effects of that trauma or that adversity. And one of those is that spiritual peace. Now, it's expressed different ways. Ann Maston calls it faith, the belief that life has meaning, hope. Others just call it faith development, spiritual development, various things. But you can already see how these are connecting. They're just connecting. His concerns, Jerome's concerns about the existential limits that children are grappling with, especially children who have faced adverse conditions, as we've just talked about. Lucy, or I'll tell you about Ella now. These kids are dealing with hard things, and they're needing help from adults to come around them and help them spiritually deal with these things. Ella was one of the girls that we met. Her mom was in prison. Her dad died last year of a drug overdose, and now her mom's in prison for drug-related things. First thing she said, 11 years old, she came in to meet her mentor, whose name is Carly. And Carly said, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" She's 11. She says, "I'm going to go to Harvard and I'm going to be a lawyer." Okay. When I was 11, I don't think I knew there was a Harvard. But she was an interesting child. By the way, one of the resilience one of those key protective factors is the sense of self-motivation or self-efficacy. And Ella has it in spades. So that's one of those things. We told the Good Shepherd story to Ella and the other children in that group of kiddos. And afterwards, this is what Carly wrote in her journal. Over the semester, I noticed that Ella carries around guilt and shame for what's happened to her mom and dad. During one of our times, we had the opportunity to listen to the Godly Play Good Shepherd story. And at the end of the story, Ella burst out and said, "I want to be the Good Shepherd for my mom and my sisters." So here was an 11-year-old wanting to take on that role. She had two younger sisters. She and her sisters were living not in foster care, not with family, but with some family friends. But she had decided this was her job. Well, Carly was a little concerned about this because, why would Ella take this on? But it did express what Ella's dealing with. These deep-rooted feelings, emotions she hadn't even realized she had. But entering this Godly Play story enabled Ella to make that connection of her wanting to be the good shepherd for her family. And then Carly said to her, "There's another good shepherd who's watching over you too." So that was a way of entering that. So it gave Ella a chance to wonder about and contemplate the things that are already going on in her heart: the death of her father, absence of her mother, and making meaning of her life. Who are you, God? Who am I, God? I mean, that story really just worked perfectly with her to help her grapple with these things. So you can see how all of Jerome's work and Godly Play is just informing so much of what I'm doing, and seeing how coming around children, helping them with their understandings of themselves and others and God, helps support them as they ask these questions, as they live into a life that they might not be expected to do. They're to do better, to be resilient, to overcome some of the hard things. It's just been amazing to see these stories unfold. But, all children hit hard places. When a parent dies, a sibling's in a car wreck. I mean, ordinary kids, you get bullied. We've had African-American children talk about what they're dealing with. But just not making a team you want to get on, not making the varsity team, being kind of unfriended in a situation. All of those are hard things that ordinary kids deal with. You don't have to be dealing with the death of a parent to be grappling with the kinds of questions that Jerome has brought up and that he introduced to me in this book. So it has really informed my work with the children, but also what I've been writing most recently. This is the question that I get from parents. The first time I remember actually hearing a parent put it like that, her little boy, she was a first-time mom, and her little boy was 4 months old. And she said, "I know I'm supposed to be doing something. What should I be doing I need to be doing something." And I thought, "Well, are you feeding your baby?" "Well, yes." "And do you rock your child?" "Yes." "Well, if he's fretting, do you soothe him?" "Well, yeah." And I said, "Well, then you are nurturing your child spiritually. You are nurturing that child's relationship with others. And that's a key piece. He's feeling safe. He's being cared for. That's huge. That's why children who are neglected from birth or abused have such a hard time in life. They haven't gotten those very basic things, the care they need. That's spiritual. And she said, oh, and her whole face relaxed and her whole body relaxed. Like, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. I mean, as they get older, there are other things you can do. There's a wonderful little video right now. Anybody can watch it. It is, if you type in Blake, 4-year-old and COVID, it's about a little girl who's 4, and she is just having a meltdown. This happened maybe last March, or April, or probably May or June, when everything was just closed. And she's saying, everything is shut down. Everything is shut down. And her mom and dad are right there. You know, they're right there and they're listening. She said, I don't like it. I don't like it. The ice cream truck is not coming, and my favorite water park is shut down. The only thing that's open is nothing. And it's just really funny. But her parents are listening to her. They say, oh, I'm so sorry. And they say, I know it's hard. Just responding warmly to her. And later she says, I'm so frustrated. And I'm thinking, she's 4. What kind of language is that? I mean, they have spent time with her, helping her understand her feelings, name her feelings, express those, and recognize that this is frustration. So they are nurturing their child spiritually. And when I explain that to people, they go, oh, they thought it was like something formal you have to do. If you're nurturing that child's understanding of themselves, if you're nurturing their relationship with you and others around them, if you are nurturing their relationship with God, you are nurturing your child spiritually. And most parents go, that just sounds, I think I can do that. I think I can do that. And that's so comforting. Later in that little conversation, let me read to you what Blake says. She's trying to make meaning. She's 4. And this is what she says. Why would germs come around people if they don't want germs to be around them? Because everybody doesn't like germs because they get sick, and everything has to be shut down because people are sick. But everything that is fun has to be shut down, and it's not fair. So she's trying to put all this together. And her parents listen to that, and they go, yeah, I know, it's hard. And then later, her dad comes back to this meaning making, and he says, you know why things are shut down, don't you? It's because we're trying to make people safe so people don't get sick. So he came around that question that she was raising and didn't explain. It was kind of illogical, some of it, but she was trying. And he comes around that and puts that to rest and gives her a good response to that. It's really lovely. These are ordinary parents, and they're just supporting her. I go through that conversation in chapter 3 in my book, and I explain exactly what they're doing, how they're supporting, how they're creating those protective factors that can buffer. Now, COVID hasn't been terrible for a lot of people, but it's been hard enough for the 4-year-olds and the 6-year-olds, and for our college students who came last year, our freshmen, who had to deal with seniors with not really finishing their senior year. Everything got shut down. They didn't get to do their internships or their counseling in the summer, their summer camp counseling. They probably didn't get their summer job. They may not have even finished their senior year. Some schools just said, you're graduated. Some did it online, but it was very different. So they are really, truly, they've been grappling with all 4 of those existential concerns, trying to make meaning out of this, the threat of death. Some have lost grandparents. Their parents may have lost jobs. They're really, they grappled with all aloneness. Talk about alone. All last semester, all these kids, college students and elementary kids who were at home with their masks or wherever they were with their masks, with nobody else around, or maybe without their masks, but nobody else around. So a lot of aloneness. I don't know how he knew all this. I guess it's from grappling with those children who were dying and had chronic illnesses. But I began to see with new eyes what he was talking about, that the coronavirus has been a place where children and adults are dealing with these existential concerns. Children are going to make meaning. They're going to try to make meaning. They're good recorders, but they're very poor interpreters. And so when children remember something or going through something, they can kind of record in their mind what's happening, but they aren't able to put it together very well. And that's why they need us. They need adults around them to help them ask good questions. One of the questions that I've gotten from Jerome Berryman is, where's God in this? And I think that's one of the things that really helps. When something hard happens, where's God in this? Now, you want to ask that question when good things happen too. Where did you see God today? This is one of the things parents ask, how can we have these ordinary conversations? Where did we see God today? And children are wonderfully creative. But then when hard things happen, you can say, where's God in this? And they begin to see God and know he's there, he's present with them. And all of these are spiritual things. So his work and what I've been doing on children's spirituality and resilience have just dovetailed. As you know, you've read, I think, the PDF of the book. I've really woven those together several places in the book. So it's really lovely to get to talk about his influence on my work. I met him at the 2003 conference. He was there. He was one of our keynote speakers. So I got to meet him and met Thea, his wife. And it was a lovely time. And we've been in contact. I wrote his entry in the database of Christian educators of the 20th century for the Talbot School of Theology database. So I wrote that long article and got to converse with him quite a bit about that. So it's been a wonderful relationship. I introduced lots of people to Godly Play. So it's been a real blessing in my life. Okay, well, Forming Resilient Children will be coming out this month in August 20th. It will arrive in the InterVarsity warehouse, and from there they will begin shipping out to people who have pre-ordered, and you should be able to get it for sure. They say release date is actually September 21st, so you should receive it by then if you have pre-ordered it, and it'll be in bookstores if there are still bookstores available at that time. I was at Books A Million the other day, and it's actually a brick and mortar store, and it was really lovely to be in a bookstore again. It's available on Amazon for pre-order. And again, probably you won't be receiving it until after September 21st, but you can go to InterVarsity Press, type in Forming Resilient Children, and their webpage that goes with it will come, and you can read about it, read the different chapters, one on parenting, one on grandparenting, one on all kinds of ministry ideas for children's ministers or small groups with children. And so in a church, a faith-based setting. The section I think that might really appeal to a lot of people is the last section. It's on children's spirituality, resilience, and trauma. That's one of the chapters, children, spirituality, resilience, and loss and grief. That's another chapter. And then good books. That's another chapter. But this is especially written for people, Christians, believing people who work with children in hurting places, work in secular settings. And they know that these children need every emotional, psychological, physical, intellectual support, help they can get to do well. And they need spiritual support too, but they are restricted in their setting. They really can't talk about Jesus. But these chapters give wonderful ideas for believers who are in secular government settings, public schools, to still nurture children spiritually. So I'm particularly happy to have that section in there. But it's been just a lifetime work to bring this together, and Jerome Berriman's work and his initial book on Godly Play and then his subsequent work has informed everything I'm doing. So it's really a delight. Get to speak about him and his work, and thank you for having me.